trend using old assessments. The smaller the house is, the more it was underassessed. The bigger the house is, the difference between there. And this is where our equity comes in. We're trying to gain equity. By year, our older homes were at 70%. That's 1900 and earlier. 1901 to 1950, we're at 64%. 51 to 70, we're at 70%, and so on and so forth. So again, kind of a trend to show that the newer homes using the old assessment were not as far out of whack as the older homes. Go ahead and change. So a lot of questions came up about acreage. So I took the time to break this down a little bit further than I normally would for a presentation. I listened to the last selectmen's meeting. Some questions came up that I hoped that this might just show where we were at and where we are now. First off, as Nicole explained to you, we have maps that start with an R and some that start with a U. The R is rural, more rural. The U is urban, so closer to in-town. The rural, we were only at 74%. The urban, we are at 67%. So it shows that the homes using the old assessments that are closer in town were selling for more, or they were underassessed more than the rural homes. So when you start putting this together, you can see why some types of properties and some locations went up more than others. This shows, breaking it down by half acre, we're at 61% of market value. Here up to 1 acre, 71%, 1 to 2 acres, 69%, 2 to 5 acres, 74%, 5 to 10 acres, 77%, and so forth. So that's the values ahead of time. This, I broke it down even further using neighborhoods. So there's a little bit better understanding. Neighborhood 101, less than 1 acre, we are at 64%, 102, 68%, 201, 68%. And then as the properties get larger in size, the acreage, then we're closer to that 100% of market value. And these are using values from the old values. Go ahead. Again, our date of value is April 1st, 2021. The overall final median for 2021 is 94.5%. Question is, you have between now and March 1st to file for an abatement if you choose to. So why should you? You would ask, can I sell my property for the assessed amount on April 1st, 2021? Does the assessing department have the correct information on my property? And you can go online and pull your card. How much are similar properties selling for? What are similar properties being assessed for? If you feel like you're not assessed appropriately, then you want to file for an abatement by March 1st and provide documentation that would show that you are overassessed. Go ahead. So I took the time, because I knew I was coming here, just to take a quick peek at where are we at for this coming ratio. So moving forward, we've had sales from October 1st, 2021 to January 1st, 2022. There's 28 valid sales, 19 are single-family homes, 4 are two-family homes, 1 mobile home, and 4 condominiums. And we are at 94.5% of market value for April 1st, and we have fallen using just these sales to 86% of market value already. So the market is just moving so quickly. Go ahead and, that's it for my presentation.
Thank you, Marybeth. That was very informative, and I appreciate that you had listened to the prior meeting and took into account many of the questions that people asked, and that was pretty thorough. Any of the board members have any questions for Marybeth?
Not offhand.
No?
Thank you very much.
All right, so I guess now I'll open it up to see if anybody still has some questions or any other comments they'd like to make. Yes, Stephanie.
Stephanie Hurley, and I do have a number of questions. One of the things is on that first chart that you showed, and you had a square footage. Now, I assume that was the square footage of the home, because it would have been much too small for square footage of a plot of land. But I want to know, how do you decide of the sale price? It sells for $350,000. How do you decide how much of that value of the $350,000 goes to the house and how much goes to the land? I mean, to me, that's the land value has been one of the things that we saw the most discrepancy in, and so I just wonder if you could answer that question.
So the land value is where you saw the most change in one particular neighborhood, because it was much lower prior. There's a process, an appraisal process that we have to use. And in New Hampshire, we have to be at market value. And how do we get there? Typically, if we're very lucky, we would have vacant land sales to be able to help us establish our land values. In Peterborough, I had a lot of land sales, quite a good amount of land sales, except that a lot of them were in current use or butter sales or percent interest sales, and I can't use those to do an analysis for market value. I had 4 sales. Actually, at the time of my study, I had 3 sales that were vacant land sales. So what we do is we build the buildings by a cost approach, and we determine the depreciation by the market. What is replacement cost, new less your depreciation. We take the sale price and we subtract out your building value and any view value or riverfront value, and what we have left is what might indicate to be market value for the land. And with that, I have to make a determination, what is the 1 acre going to be worth and what is your residual acres going to be worth. And then there is what we call a curve. So the smaller it gets, you take a little bit off. The larger it gets over that 1 acre, you add a little bit more on. So that's how we determine what portion goes on your land line or your building line on your tax bill. When you're looking at your value for an abatement, you would want to look at your overall value. What would it sell for? Because that's what we're looking at, is market value. So land and building together, what is that value? Did that answer your question? It's complex. There's no easy answer. It's complex.
I mean,
It's a complex process.
Because some of the land values just don't seem right. So anyway, for that question, I guess.
So you're referring to Neighborhood 101. Let's open that right up. I valued the land values at $90,000 per acre, and then there's some that gets taken off the smaller it gets, and there's a residual value of $9,000. And in 101, if you picked up the chart, our median acreage in there is 0.67 acres. We have 2 land sales that actually support that 101 assessment. I have a property out on Lookout.
I got it.
I have a property on Lookout Hill, 0.76 acres, sold for $150,000. That's $150,000 for less than an acre. And I've got $90,000 on that 1 acre primary. Another one is, let me see, let me write the address down. Get the address. So 24 Laurel Street was 1.27 acres, that has 10% off for heavy traffic, and it sold for $90,000. So we have 2 sales that support what I put on the vacant land.
Do you really think that 2 sales is enough to?
It's
base the
not,
whole
that's why
town?
we do the extraction process.
Sharon?
The Laurel Street one, I did the septic design plan for the builder for it. And he recently, so it would be in your new sales, bought a lot off of Sand Hill Road, neighborhood 102, okay? And I just wanted to say that was 2 acres, and he paid the same price. So, the same price as Laurel Street, okay? So, $90,000. I think he paid $93,000, okay? But the point is, and I'm working on the septic for that one as well. My point is, when I asked him, you know, why'd you say pay the same price, you know? And he said, well, in Peterborough, it doesn't matter. A buildable lot is a buildable lot. And so, you know, and that seems to be the market price right now for a buildable lot in Peterborough. And so with that in mind, I realize this is just someone who's, you know, a builder and developer. I don't understand why all the properties are not valued the same, since we're talking about the same buyer, you know. And in the rural areas, we have 3-acre minimum zoning, you know, whereas family district zoning, we have 1-acre minimum. So in order to have a buildable lot, you know, you have to have 3 acres. So I don't understand why that's not equal. Okay, I'm just saying, a buildable lot is a buildable lot.
So the properties that are selling, the 3-acre minimum might be required for new subdivisions, but that's not what we have, like all over Peterborough. All the rural lots don't have to be 3 acres, they're not. They would be, they are not. If you look at the sheet that I handed out, it tells you the range for each neighborhood, and it tells you what the median and the average is in those neighborhoods.
At some point, could somebody make more of those sheets, because we were able to get.
Good, I'll give you mine.
I'd like one too.
Well, you can collect them after, but I'll give you mine so you can share.
Another question?
Yes.
Sorry, I can't tell who you are.
No, that's okay. I'm Linda Sobinsky.
Oh, hi, Lynn.
On Carly Road. I just have, first of all, I realized that I didn't get, because I was one of the last people here, I didn't get one of those handouts. And that relates to my question. Is it possible for us to access some of this information? Because it's a lot to remember.
Sure, it's all.
I understood it while you were saying it, but I could never explain
It'll be
it.
on the town website, and Ally, if you don't mind, if you want to put my presentation up there as well, then at least people can look
Okay,
through
thank
it.
you. Thank you. And will this handout, either could I pick it up at the townhouse tomorrow or something?
Is that the neighborhood?
It's the
neighborhood one,
one
yeah.
Stephanie is holding.
We
We'll
can,
have all of them up on the website tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ken Sutcliffe. I think you're also inadvertently targeting a group of people who are really vulnerable. The group that was 140 to 150 and then it went up to an average of 238, well, that's retired condo owners. And we don't, you know, I'm a native of Peterborough, and I'm very happy where I'm living. And so unless I want to sell, I can't really afford to live here. And then if I sell it, I'm in a community that's already expensive.
Yeah, and this is something that I hear quite a bit. I am responsible for the assessments in 14 communities. And it's unfortunate, but it's the law. When I do a revaluation, I have to look at the market value. I'm not looking at the lovely people who live in the homes. I'm looking at the different information about the buildings and the land, et cetera, and what are those properties selling for. And that's what I have to do. There's the relief that's available is through exemptions and credits if you qualify for them. There's a moderate, what is it called?
Low
To moderate that the state offers that you can apply for. But it's very difficult for me because I love people and I love houses. But when I'm doing a reassessment of property, I have to step out of who are the people that are living in the homes, and I have to just look at the properties and what are they selling for and what should their value be. But then when I come to the assessing office and I get to meet with you each individually, that's when we can talk about, is there any relief that is available in a different way?
Yes.
I don't really understand the whole process. So you did this all on paper, based on paper, facts, market value.
I did not do it on paper.
But I mean, you didn't go to each home and...
We have. Our company's responsible to go out and measure and inspect your home.
Okay, because I didn't know if I had to apply for the abatement, and then you would come and actually look at the physical.
So we can come to your home anytime. We have people available that for appointments. Myself, Ron Doyon, who maybe some of you have met, Katie Walker, who some of you may have met. We do a cycled inspection process, which we've not been able to do all the properties over the last 2 years due to COVID, but we have had an ongoing measure and inspect process that is in place here in Peterborough, where we visit a quarter of the properties every year. You get a postcard in the mail, invitation to make an appointment with us, and we check the data that's on the property record card. That's very different than the analysis that it has to be done to revalue your property. Yes, that is done in the office, but we also go and visit all the sales to make sure the data is correct.
And ma'am, could I have your name?
I'm sorry, Janet Brown.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Loretta.
Loretta Lauren, I had a couple of questions. One is, I don't really understand the purpose of the neighborhood code and how that impacts the evaluation of the properties. Some properties, I know there are a couple of properties on Concord Street right next door to each other, and one is 101 and one is 102. And I know the properties are not all in one location, and they're described, they're said to be descriptors. But what do you mean by descriptors?
So the number is a descriptor. That is just a number that we put into the system to say this property belongs to 101, this property belongs to 102, etc.
What I'm asking is, why does one house go into 101 and the one right next to it goes into 102?
Yep.
Who makes that decision?
So-
How does that impact the value of the property?
Yep. So what happens is you are grouped into neighborhoods, and some properties that are right next to each other may be in a different neighborhood because one's a corner lot and one's not. Or when we did the reevaluation, we may feather up, which means we may go up the road 2 or 3 houses and put those in the other neighborhood. That usually happens when a sale occurs and it shows that that neighborhood or that property needs to be in the other neighborhood so that we can get to market value. So we have a neighborhood system set up, whereas on 103 is the whole subdivision for Kentucky Monadnock. 201 is Robb Farm and Legacy. It's all the subdivision. That's 38 parcels, 103 is 35 parcels. We usually get enough sales within those actual neighborhoods to value those properties. Then we have 101, 102, and 107 that are set up for the other residential properties. and that does not mean condominiums. And in 101, almost all of those properties that are in there are the the urban. They are along Route 136 and 202 and 101. And there's a colored map that's available you can see to see where the neighborhoods are. 102 has a descriptor. There's about 635 parcels in there. Most of those are on the rural maps, with only about 80 being in the urban. 107, that is about half and half, and that's High Street, Hunter Farm, Windy Row, etc. So that's the characteristics of those neighborhoods. And we put the neighborhoods together. And then I was looking, because the neighborhood, I had a couple of very strange ones that are in 101, way out here. There's 3 of them. And I said, well, why are those in 101? Well, I went in and I looked at the parcel, and in 2002, there was a sale and an abatement that took place. And the assessor at that time moved them from 102 into 101, and they were left there. They've not been revised and pulled back into 102 since, because at that time, the abatement came through, and the person showed that the value of his property needed to be lower. And so we moved that in. Now, that was neighborhoods at that point in time, the values at that point in time. So you can have 2 properties that are right next to each other in different neighborhoods. Should they be? There may be an indicator somewhere along the line that put them that way, but literally you can't put space between 2 houses. So somewhere along the line, there has to be a line that you draw, and hopefully we've drawn it in the right place.
Well, there can be a house in New Hampshire and one in Massachusetts that are within 20 feet of each other, but it doesn't mean there is an imaginary line between them.
Very true. Yep. In regard.
Hold on. Let me hear from everybody first, and then I'll get back to you, Stephanie.
Marilyn
Yes,
Weir. I have not yet heard what are the characteristics of any individual neighborhood. It sounds like you're assuming we know what they are.
I just handed you a sheet of paper that has all of them listed.
I don't have one.
We don't have it.
If somebody
A lot
wants
of
to
people don't
hand
have
one to me, I'll
one.
make some more copies.
Well, and I'm not going to go over the whole paper right now, so that's something that you can pick up later or print out from online.
Maybe
Could you put it on the screen? Show it on the screen?
It's up to the selectmen, but I don't know how much time I want to spend
I
going over
can't
each
show it on the screen
neighborhood.
right now, I don't have it loaded, but Ally's making copies to hand out.
Do we have, yes, Bob?
I'm Bob Bolt from Peterborough, and I looked at a bunch of properties in Code 101 and a bunch of properties in 102, and the 102 tend to be larger acreage, 3 to 5 acres, and the 101s tend to be about a half to 1 acre, so much smaller acreage in the 101. That seems to be one of the determining factors of the 101 properties. Do you think that's fair?
It is fair, except that we do have smaller, there's a full range in 102 that is, yep, so 102, there's a range of 0.02 acres to 379 acres, and the median acreage is 5.4, and the average acreage is 21.7. So, and in 101, the median is 0.67, and the average is 1.6.
Right, so I did an analysis of about 20 properties, but I could have done another 50. And by and large, the people in 101 with small properties, about half an acre, are paying the assessed land value is higher than the properties in 102, which tend to be 3 to 5 acres. In other words, it's not proportional to the acreage, it's the actual assessed value of the land. So people with smaller properties on very small lots are paying higher property taxes than people with much larger lots, 3 to 5 acres. And I don't see how that's equalization.
Yeah, so I'll answer one question about neighborhood 102. One of the things I have to do is a cost study, and when I did cost studies of new houses in 102, the cost study that I had showed that the values of buildings had to go up a little bit, So there is a matrix that we can apply a multiplier, and 102 is the only one that has it. So the multiplier for buildings is 2%. So if you take any building in 101 and you move it into 102, your assessed land value is going to go down, but your building value is going to go up by 2%. So there's a full analysis that goes along with it. That's why we don't separate out what is your land value and what is your building value. Is what is your overall value of your property.
That's the real question that everybody's basically asking. So here's its question. If there were no neighborhood codes whatsoever, and everybody saw your assessment, would you, A, say that it's a fair assessment of the total value of your property, or B, is there a reason that it isn't? I mean, the codes are a way that you use to help assess value, and maybe there's a place that's 5 acres, but only a quarter of an acre of it is buildable. So there could be a difference there. If you're looking at stuff on paper, you're not actually inspecting the property, it's hard to tell. Right, I mean, the overall question is your property assessed at a fair number, or is it not?
Is there anybody that hasn't asked a question yet that would like to ask? Yes?
I'm Nancy Lucow, and I haven't lived in a condo before until we moved here, and I'm sorry, I just don't get it. Like, we own 5 feet from our condo, but then there is like 90 acres of common land on East Ridge Drive. So how is our land factored in? I'm sorry, I just don't understand.
No, and you don't have to apologize, that's why we're here. So condominiums are done differently by different assessors and in different communities. And the goal is to be at market value, keep that in mind. And years ago in Peterborough, we would have a land value that was assigned, and it wasn't based on acreage, it was based on...
Sorry, it's hard to hear.
Yep, it wasn't based on acreage, it was based on site value. So, or we called it site value. And what we would do for each condominium complex is we would figure out what the building value is, and we would subtract that out of the price of the property, and what you have left over used to be called a site value here in Peterborough. A few years ago, the town administrator that was here said, there's so many questions about condominium site values. People just don't understand why there's land value on their tax bill when they don't really have land, although they have shared interest in it. So what happens is with a condominium, we have to determine what your market value would be based on your property. That market value includes all your amenities, whether you have no amenities, except maybe a mailbox, or you have a pool and a tennis court and everything. All of that stuff is considered in your market value of your condominium. And so we take the building value, and there's a factor that we place on that building value to bring you up to market value. And that's done within those complexes. So the same factors put on each of the buildings in that complex, with the exception of some of the complexes are split out due to either age or, say, Newbie River, if you're fortunate enough to live there. The smaller Newbie River condominiums at one point showed they needed one factor, and the much larger one showed they needed another factor, so we split those out. The same way you might if there was some other thing in the complex that would show value difference. So you see just a building value on your tax bill.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Okay, yes, Hope.
Mine's kind of a broader, long-term thing. Who decides all this convoluted stuff? I mean, have the taxpayer, when I first came here, I think the assessments were done every 10 years, then it went to every 5 years, and apparently that they can be done any time that the municipal government wants, whether it's in this town or any town. Is that correct throughout New Hampshire?
might be time for me to jump in.
Yes.
Okay, I was gonna say, it was a question for you guys. I want the rest of the part of it, in other words, have the taxpayers voted on any of this stuff, ever?
Well, you voted in the selectmen. Sorry, didn't put you guys under the gun.
Take it easy, Sam.
All right, well, so let me, first, my name's Sam Greene, and I live in Jaffrey, and I've lived there on and off for about 30 years, and then I'm a real estate appraiser, so I've done dozens of appraisals here in Peterborough, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Department of Revenue, and Lisa's the supervisor of the West District, so she covers 70 towns, basically the southwestern portion of the state. And so Peterborough's her assigned town. So I just wanted to start by just saying that everything that Marybeth talked about as far as the market goes is spot on. I mean, I see values all over the state. And so recently we had Salem, New Hampshire did a reval. And the mobile homes and parks were at 57%. Commercial properties were at 100%. The residential stuff was at 80%. And when they did a reval, unfortunately, I had this person in a mobile home park called me up and say, I just got jacked up, to a lot more than anybody else in town. And I said, unfortunately, the market in Salem and really throughout the state, the low-end properties, because there's such a housing crisis. I mean, there's people that want houses that can afford houses. The people that on the lower end of the affordability scale are having to pay more than, I'm sure, than you all feel like the house is worth. And that's happening all over the state, from Pittsburgh to Peterborough. So I just don't want you, I want you to know that you're in the same boat as the people on the other side of Temple Mountain. And they've got a lot worse, actually, in Rockingham County. Those values over there, you can't touch anything anywhere near Portsmouth or in that neck of the woods. So I know it doesn't feel like it, but we got it good over here. This has been happening. You've read about it in the newspaper. So it's the market, and I know Marybeth because Marybeth works in about at least 10 other communities, I think, in the state. And she's not trying to put it to anybody, and she's not targeting anybody. Unfortunately, in the state of New Hampshire, assessing is supposed to be based on market value, and with some exceptions. Okay, so current use land is based on the agricultural production, the capability of agricultural production on open space, and there's a reason we have market current use, but it's valued based on a different basis than market value. There's low-income housing is based on something other than market value. There's a lot of exceptions to market value, but by and large, market value is the basis for assessing. As opposed to some states like Connecticut and Pennsylvania, for instance, have their assessments are based on like 70% of market value or 50% of market value, or some, to me, this is a lot simpler, but it's painful because it's based on what your property is worth. So you got to remember there's the other part of the equation, because I think the reason most of you are here is because you've got big tax bills, okay? It's not so much that you want your property to be worth more than it was 5 years ago when you bought it. No, you don't? Okay. Well, it would be great, but unfortunately, you got to remember there's two sides of the coin, and you've got the tax rate, which we also set the tax rates, but really the tax rate is a pretty simple equation. What's the town spent? What does it have to make up at the end of the year, minus any income that it has, rooms and meals and things like that, and then it's the total assessed value divided into what has to be made up at the end of the year that you all voted on. And that's your tax rate, right? So yeah, I think there's probably some reasons why the tax rate wasn't as flexible this year. A lot of times, especially after revaluation, total assessed value goes up, and you can, your tax rate, you expect your tax rate to go down, right?
And it did.
Which it did.
Okay, and it did. But I think there was maybe a little bit less wiggle room because of, obviously, Peterborough's been in the news with the scam, and, I'm sure, I know it's new, right?
Peterborough's in the news?
So I just want to reiterate that it's market value, it's not Marybeth out to get anybody, and what's happening in Peterborough is happening throughout the state and other states too, okay? I did want to bring up a couple of things. One, there is the mechanism, and I read the newspaper last week about the possibility of changing the elderly exemption formula, which is a very real possibility, and I did bring some paperwork on that. I also brought a summary report, and different towns deal with elderly exemptions different ways, and the same with veterans credits, okay? So, obviously I went to Peterborough, and then I went to my town of Jaffrey. There's really three things that you want to figure in. You want to figure out what the elderly exemption amount is that's being granted. But there's also the ability of the town to raise or lower the eligibility rates, which in other words, the income and the asset. Okay, so you've got three knobs that you can turn. Okay, so I brought this report so you can review that. We have, basically reports online. But just as a for instance, Jaffrey's got doesn't provide, it's not as generous with the amount, but it's probably a little bit easier to qualify for. So you've got to figure that in. You've got towns where it's a little bit easier to qualify for. They may not be as generous, but they may end up actually giving out the same amount of exemption. And don't forget that whenever there's an exemption being given out, or a veteran's tax credit being given out, or any other exemption, whether it's property-based like solar or property-based, whenever you're giving away money, the other portion of the town is picking up the tab. So, there's a lot of things for these gentlemen to think about. So I'm not saying that there's any right or wrong calculation, but I would recommend looking at some of the other towns around you that you think are similar in socioeconomic character, and you may want to tweak that. As far as the DRA goes, we do a review of, we basically are charged with monitoring revaluations. There was not a requirement to do a revaluation for this year. However, based on the statistics we saw, it probably just would alleviate the pain that you would have seen in 2 years. Okay, because 2 years, chances are the market's going to keep on going. We'll see. We'll see. There's a lot of, okay. Well, there's a lot of things that are not the same as they were in 2006. Okay, there hasn't been a lot of overbuilding. There's not these crazy, mortgage schemes and things like that. So we'll see what happens. But right now, the clock has been restarted. You have another 5 years from this year.
But they could cut it to 4.
We cannot, now that you've done what they call a full statistical revaluation, okay, you are now starting your new clock. So you now have another 5 years before you have to do it as far as the state goes, okay? The Constitution and 75-8A, it's a statute that talks about revaluations. The requirement is at least as often as every 5 years. Okay.
Do you know when that
you can
started?
do it more, excuse me?
Do you remember when that started? Just to touch on that
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
She was wondering what.
Yeah. When did it go from 10 to 5? And I have a follow-up question when you're done, Sam.
Sure. I probably wasn't in the business, but I believe it basically goes back to the Claremont decision. And if you go back to the Constitution, it said all along that there was a requirement to bring values anew of estates every 5 years. And there shall be a valuation of estates within the state taken anew once in every 5 years, at least, and as much oftener as the general court shall order. So that's the old Constitution. I don't know the history of why they got away from it, but that was part of the Claremont decision, the Sorrell decision, and that's when the 5-year became, basically law.
Okay, so this is a discussion that I had with some people before this, because we weren't always at full value. And I think it makes a big difference to the character of a town, which has come up already tonight. If we have full valuation in a place like Peterborough, there are going to be people forced out.
They're going to be people what?
Forced out.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and that's, so how, so does the legislature, like in Connecticut, vote to do 70% evaluation and somewhere
Yeah, that-
along New Hampshire,
that
they
would-
decided to do 95%, or how does that work?
Yeah, that would have to be a change in the law. And don't forget, if you're at,
legislature,
if
right?
you're, yeah. So if you're at 70% though, your tax rate's going to be higher than it is now. You know, because you still got to make the nut at the end of the year that you voted on in March, right?
It makes a difference as time goes on, how things, right? I mean,
Well, keep in mind in Connecticut, they have sales tax, they have income tax, so they don't use property tax as their main source of income like Peterborough does for revenue. So, I mean, New Hampshire, sorry. So that's why.
Wherever we are.
They can get away with 50% home value for taxation purposes.
right. So, but these decisions on how things work and when they change and all that is at the state legislature
Yeah,
level?
sure,
Okay.
sure, absolutely. And there are towns that have tax caps, you know, and I'm not making any recommendations at all, but I'm just saying that, you know, Franklin, probably more so cities, have a certain cap on the increase in spending. That's really the only, and I don't know how to implement that or anything else, but we can't cap assessments because it's market-driven, market value, and if things go up for the next 2 years, and then things go down for the next 3 years after that, we could end up exactly where we're at now for the next 5 years. I do want to stress, though, that what was done isn't bad assessing practice. You had certain properties that were under-assessed more than others. And so that has been captured. And the illustration that Marybeth showed of neighborhoods 101 and 102 are perfect examples of that. But also the other examples that she showed. I forget, you had site size, you had type of house, the size of house.
Yep.
And I also want to, for anybody who wants to see, one of the things that we review as the Department of Revenue, that we review and approve at the end of the process, and where Lisa's gone through it to make sure that everything's in there, we still have more work to do to complete this review. But there's a USPAP report. USPAP stands for Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, which is the same law, same thing that an appraiser has to do to provide a report to the bank, which you then get when you close on your loan. The USPAP report has to have documentation of how you came up with your value, which in that case you're using 3, 4, 5, 6 sales. You're making adjustments for those sales. How'd you reconcile those sales? Did you do the cost approach, the income approach, the sales approach? You know, it's basically the description of your property and all the glossy photos and all that good stuff. She has to do the same thing, and there's been a USPAP report. I don't know how long that's been here.
At least a month.
Okay.
Oh, longer than that.
And we have a copy of it, so it's here, and I would highly recommend any of you, because it's going to give you more detail than what you saw today. Come in and take a look at it, because it's the whole idea. The legislature implemented the requirement that assessors in the state of New Hampshire provide a USPAP report back in 2006. And to your point, it's because in New Hampshire, it's all about property tax, right? There's no income tax, there's no sales tax. And the thing that really brought it to bear was the whole view tax. View adjustment, sorry. And it was decided that, you know, the assessing company in Orford and Plainfield basically didn't do a good enough job of explaining to the townspeople how they come up with their views. There's no question views add value, but they didn't really nail it as far as their analysis goes. So I just want to assure you that from the DRA standpoint, we're looking at sales that were used. We go out and field review stuff. We look at the USPAP report. I did drive some neighborhoods in question, And if you think that, you know, to your point, or I think somebody's point, you got to draw the line somewhere. I might not agree going down Scotland Road. I went down Scotland Road, I went out Sand Hill Road. I may or may not agree that is where I would draw the line. That's up to the assessor. If you're the one that you think you're paying more than your neighbor because you're in neighborhood 101, I would encourage you to file an abatement or talk to Marybeth or both. And, you know, on a case-by-case basis, you have until March 1st to file your abatement request. And then if you feel like you're being undervalued, you can still file a request with either the Board of Tax and Land Appeals or Superior Court on top of that. But
Well, also, if you feel that maybe you could sell your house for more, you can bring that information to Marybeth. Your assessment.
I will tell you that there's a lot of stuff going on. You look at what's happening up on Cranberry Meadow Road, for instance. Knock your socks off with values. So.
With that in mind, there is a lot of new, and we've been discussing this for several days now, there's a lot of new houses and condos and real estate that's going to be added to the tax rolls too, which is will certainly help to spread out the burden over far more properties. But what do we got? Just a real quick short synopsis. In the last several months, we've got like another, what was it, $7+ million added to the tax rolls?
Yes.
And that number was based off of building permit costs and not the actual value. So that number is probably closer to 10 or 11. And it also didn't capture every new construction house either.
It doesn't capture renovations, it doesn't capture
Right,
additions,
so that,
you know, other
I mean,
things
it's-
that add significant value.
One of the benefits to this boom is that a lot of people built a lot of expensive houses, additions, and condos, and that money, that revenue is going to be coming to help offset the rest of us that are just trying to live here. So it is going to help.
To get back to the frequency of revaluations, Peterborough has had the practice of townwide every 5 years, but each year a portion of the town, I guess a fifth of it, has been revalued.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a misnomer. So what you're doing is you're doing a cyclical inspection schedule. Marybeth and her team is doing a cyclical inspection schedule. So the purpose of that is to capture the inventory changes that occur on an annual basis. The old way of doing a revaluation used to be, you know, Marybeth's team of whatever, 10 people or 8 people or whatever, would come in, blow into town, measure and list all the properties in town, do a revaluation, and, you know, be gone, and be gone. Blow out, yeah. Well, the problem with that is it's kind of a big expense for the town, and it's a big effort on Marybeth's part to do that all in 1 year. So the kind of the operating procedure for a lot of assessing right now is they'll do a cyclical inspection process of doing a quarter of the town year 1, quarter of the town year 2, 3, 4, and then in the 5th year they'll do what is really the true appraisal of property, bringing properties to market value. So if you've put on a 2-story, addition on the back of your house that you haven't told the building inspector about, and Marybeth's team comes out and they capture that. Then, I'm looking at one person. I don't know him. I swear.
He lives in
But let's say that they capture a 400 square foot addition. Okay, that gets added to the tax rolls in the year that it's captured or found. Okay, but it would be captured at the rate of the square foot cost that was most recently established. So it's not reappraising that house, it's just adding to the inventory of that house. If you add a shed, and let's say that Marybeth said sheds were $1,000, a year ago, when she set the values, it's going to be a $1,000 shed. So it's not reappraising, it's just adding to the inventory. It's basically it's kind of doing what the building inspector is doing. It's a second tier. So that having been said, there is a misconception amongst towns that cyclical inspection work is required. It's not, okay?
But the same,
But, and so let me, but so let me just say that it's a good, again, good assessing practice to boots on the ground, no, you know, they're out looking at pickups April 1st anyways. And so if you wanted to skip a schedule of cyclical inspection work, you can do that. And it's entirely up to you and the town, everybody involved. I can't tell you to do it or not do it. But there are towns that, you know, do it for 5 years and they'll skip 5 years and maybe they'll. Nashua, one of the reasons they did a reval recently, or they're in the midst of a reval this year, is because they went almost 30 years since their last full measure and list. And so even when they did a good reval, it didn't come out very good because all the data was messed up.
And that reval wasn't voluntary, you probably want to add that.
What's that?
Oh.
That reval wasn't
So-
voluntary.
Okay, yeah, I have a question, statistics. Okay, and so it's based on the statistics, and I think it's concerning the statistical methods, but I first just looked at the sales data that you used, and my question is this. I noticed that properties that sold for, let's say, $255,000 are, oh, no, that's not a good example, actually. Usually the higher the property, you know, it sold for a high price. So I'll just take this example. Okay, so here's one. I'm just saying it sold for $303,000, okay? And there's quite a few, but their assessed value is now $250,000. And I saw a lot of properties where they cut it back, you know what I mean? They have their assessed values, it's not just for what it sold for, their assessed values are now $50,000. Actually, one is $75,000 less than what they sold for. So is this have to do with the median? Because the other properties, like my neighborhood, which is older properties, the sales data, it was an old property, it sold, you know, let's say it sold over $40,000 more than the previous assessment value, and it was just in 2021, and then the new assessments made it $40,000 more. You know what I mean? They assessed the other properties more. So does this have to do with your median and your coefficient of dispersion around the median, or why are some jacked up and some lowered? You know, I guess that's what I'm asking. Is that a statistical thing that you have to do?
It has to do with when did it sell, for the most part, because I'm valuing it as of April 1st, and I have to value all properties as of April 1st. So we have some properties that sold well before that, and we have some properties on that list that sold 6 months after that. So remember, the market's moving at 1%. So if something sold on April 1st, it might be pretty close to that 98%. Remember, I showed that chart to you, that if something sold in October of 2020, we'd be at around 98% of market value. But if something sold in September 30th of 2021, we'd already be down to 89% of market value using the new assessments. So there's a lot of that has to do with the market is moving so fast. My value isn't the date that it sold. My value is April 1st of 2021. And then along with that is I can't go to a property and say you sold for $200,000 and adjust that value to $200,000 and go over to another property that sold for $750 and adjust that to $750. I am changing all of the different components behind the scenes, so to speak, that have to do with square foot value, the quality of materials used, how many bathrooms there are in the building, what is the porches, decks, outbuildings, all of that stuff, and each property is not going to have exactly the same thing.
So I would just add that, so the idea is that she's building a model from the sales, and hopefully, what we don't want to see is sales chasing, which is what
I asked, yeah, originally.
Yeah, so what you don't want to see is all the sales to magically, all the new assessments magically meet, be close to the sales prices.
And if
'Cause
they
that's-
do, Sam's going to take my certification away.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Well,
But-
that's why
so-
I asked.
Yeah.
I don't
So the idea is,
Yeah.
she's building a model out of the sales. So you got qualified sales that are being used to build the model, because the qualified sales are market, they're the market sales, and they're what the market's paying for your property, whether we like it or not. And then she's applying that, all the little granular parts of that model, square foot cost, front acreage, or, primary site, back acreage value, excess acreage value, quality, condition, outbuilding, sheds, all that stuff that makes up value, and applies that to everybody. And what she should be doing is letting the cards fall as they may, because if she's feeling good about her model, which the statistics are showing good results to her model, then it's much better to actually have a COD of 10 than sales chase and have a COD of 4, a coefficient of dispersion. So the idea is build a model, and not everybody's going to be assessed at 100% of market value. You're going to have some people assessed at under 10%, some assessed at over 10%. That's actually, as much as you may not like to hearing that your neighbor might be under-assessed by 10% and you might be over-assessed by 10%. In the world of assessing, which is not a perfect thing, because you're dealing with market value and market, all of real estate is imperfect market. It's still a good reval if you're plus or minus 10%. So, and you're in better shape than that. So
Another important point about that sales chasing is that, say somebody from New York City just sold their $1 billion apartment, whatever, and they come up to your next door neighbor's house and they're like, I don't care what it is, I'll pay you for this house. And so the person says, I'll take $500,000 for it. And so that person will pay the $500,000 for it. If that house is then assessed at $500,000 because it sold for that, and it's really a $200,000 house or a $250,000 house, then everybody on the street's assessment should, in theory, be affected by that sale. And you don't want your house, you don't want your house to be assessed at whatever some person that's completely out of their mind might pay for it.
We've had a lot of great questions, and I've learned quite a bit myself. I'll take one more question from Stephanie, and then I think we have to move on. We have some other business to take care of at our meeting. We've got a lot of information, and more information can be had through the abatement process if you think that's the way to go.
Well,
Yes, Stephanie.
Okay, I'm still not happy at all about the neighborhood codes. I think, I really don't understand why residential houses aren't all categorized together. These neighborhood codes make no sense to me. They're all mixed, they're mixed acreage, but primarily, 101 is a lot of small places and 102 is a lot of large places. And I have an example that is one of the reasons.
Is this a question or a statement?
No, I have an example about why something.
But Stephanie, please, if it's a question that maybe can be answered, please ask it, but if you're just making a statement, I think we've
Well,
heard
my
this
question is,
statement.
why is this way?
Well, I think we've heard explanations about this.
I'm talking about one road, and in the map, this one road is primarily, and it's on the 101, so it's primarily 101. And you've got all these, it's on Hunt Road, and you've got all these buildings that are 101, and then you've got two in the middle that are 101, and one large estate is in the middle of it, and it is 102. And I don't understand, so the large estate is 8.34 acres, and the land is assessed at $61,560. And the neighboring lot, on the same side as them, is 2.5 acres, and because of being 101, the land is assessed at $105,000. Now, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that there's something wrong with this neighborhood code thing. I don't understand how, when you look at this, it's all over the map. There are neighborhoods all over the place, It doesn't make sense, and it's not fair. It's not fair that a 2.5-acre property is only, the land has gone, the assessment is so large, and this other one is so small. It's 61,000, it's 8 acres. That is not right. That is not, that just
Does it
doesn't
seem
make
like the
sense.
prices of those two houses are fair if you're taking out the land versus building?
Well,
I mean, do those seem like, because it really doesn't matter how you get to the total assessment. I understand completely what you're saying, it makes complete sense what you're
I'm
saying.
totally,
But
I
the
just.
total valuation is really where it's at.
But then it gets skewed.
But it's not where it's at, because these land values have pushed these tiny lots and small lots, especially in the center of the town up there, where they're small lots, and they're being charged $90,000, assessed $90,000 for their land, and it's pushing all of their total bills way up versus
Well-
these other ones, and I don't understand it.
$90,000, I mean, we just heard the testimony that there were 2 lots that sold for $90,000 in the.
One was 100.
Yeah, but that should be, my feeling is it should be townwide. I mean, why isn't it
So-
townwide?
Can I speak to that for a second? Just, and I don't want to speak to that particular situation, because I don't know the details of that, and I think that's for a conversation for you to have with Marybeth, but these are, well, you've probably heard this once or twice before. Location, location, location. Okay? So neighborhoods are location, okay? So when I drove around to properties, and I went out to Scott Wynn Road, and I went up to McDowell Road, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go up McDowell Road and see if I can estimate when it's gonna go to neighborhood 107, which is the pink on there, for anybody following along. And sure enough, it's just like, you kind of start off and everything down at the bottom of Windy Row from McDowell Road. It's pretty modest homes. And you start going up, and then it's like that first farm you see coming up, and that's when I pulled over and I'm like, okay, where am I? I'm right there. I'm right on the cusp of from beige to pink. Don't call it 101, 102, whatever. Now, again, a lot of these towns, I mean, you might have a side street that all of a sudden abuts 101. So you could have 2 properties on the same street. They could be right next door to each other, but you don't want to live on the corner of 101, right? So there's all kinds of instances where you need to look very specifically at the site-specific of this map, which I don't think Marybeth revisited everybody on this map this past year. Last time she did it was probably
We did it in 2018.
2018, which, maybe she could have gone out and done a re-review of that, but, neighborhoods don't change that quickly. I wouldn't be surprised that next time we do a reval, Cranberry Meadow is pink, because it's kind of like it's basically the next Windy Row or even beyond that with some of the views up there. So it's a neighborhood thing. And I know it's coded and nobody likes numbers. And everybody wants science behind this, and it's very hard to do that. So I would definitely recommend you talk to Marybeth if you've got a specific code issue. Anybody. That would be a great reason possibly for an abatement if your next door neighbor is assessed at $50,000 less to you just because the neighborhood line was different. So.
And I would like to say that I am very happy to talk with people over the phone, visit with you in person, but I have stopped the send me emails, I'm going to answer you in writing. It got quite cumbersome, so I just stopped. If for some reason you think that all of my answers need to be public beyond today, I'm not sure what to say about that, but there's a process and procedure. If you feel that your property is over-assessed, please file for an abatement, and we can meet and talk at that point in time. Sharon, no matter how I explain it to you, you're not going to understand it or accept what I have done, but this is how I appraise the town. And whether it's land values, building values, or I put $100,000 on a pool, or I had someone call me and tell me, why isn't that pool at $100,000 here in Peterborough? So what I would like to say is I can do my best to explain it to you, but there's a full process that's involved with appraising and doing mass appraisal. And I can't, multiple appraisers could attack this community and the values of this community in different ways. But in the end, it's market value, your overall assessment. Could you sell your house for that on April 1st? And then you can even figure in the 95% or 94.5%, which is our median, so you should be right around that.
Just for clarity, Ally looked up that property real quick. It's in current use, and that's the reason why the land value is so very low on that particular parcel, is because that land is in current use.
There's only 1 acre that's not in current use,
Right.
and that will reduce the.
But it's also in 102, so it has a lower, if it were in current use in 101, it would still be 90,000 rather than 60,000.
That 1 acre, yeah.
And with that, I guess I will thank Marybeth, Sandra.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for coming.
I'm going to leave this with you in case it helps.
I'm gonna read it thoroughly.
It's a tough decision to make.
You had a technical.
Sorry, excuse me. We have quiet for a moment. Nicole has something to
We
say.
had a technical issue getting the broadcast and the streaming working, so the first 15 minutes or so we missed, unfortunately. But we will put Mary Beth's presentation up online. Mary Beth was kind enough to more or less read that straight from the slides, so you'll be able to follow along and then pick up right where the recording comes in.
Okay, thank you. All right, now, sorry, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Stick around if you want to hear about.
I'll talk to you about it. I know where I can get it.
I don't have one. What about those little maps?
Here, I'll give you one. I'm the one that requested them.
And you've got one.
I'm the instigator. Yeah, I started it. I started it. I couldn't figure it out.
Okay, because at one point there was nothing there.
Yeah.
You can have this one back if you like.
Oh, does anyone else want it?
Are you kidding? Thank you.
Quick question, do you have any idea what the success rate of the applications are?
I know.
We don't keep statistics
Oh, you
like
don't?
that.
Okay.
They're so individual. It really
Okay.
depends.
Thank you.
Crowd is thinned out considerably, isn't it?
And so let's consider discussing the criteria for elderly exemptions and that sort of thing in June.
Yeah, well, we just did it, but.
I know, but, we also did a reval not too long ago too, and look at how much things changed.
Yeah, right.
So it was in 2019 that we visited that.
Yeah.
And that was to catch it up to the state, right?
Right.
All right.
Come back. I was gonna close the door.
Can't close the door.
Oh, that's right, you can't. That's right.
It's tough. It's a tough thing.
I'm sorry, but the microphones are picking up everything, so I need you to move outside.
Should have a cone of silence.
Or just respect.
All right, our next item up for business, we are finally at the point where we can acquire that land for the municipal campus
The
project.
much delayed eminent domain process.
Right.
So we started discussions about this in 2019. The select board at that time agreed to move forward, and we started discussing it with Harris Center. Harris Center agreed. They, asked that we go through this process, and so we started it, and then there was a pause, and now we're picking it back up again. The last time the select board discussed this was on May 24th. At that time, they had a vote to proceed with the acquisition by eminent domain of those 2 parcels located on Elm Street and Route 101. John Radigan just wants to make sure he's got all his ducks in a row when he goes to do the filing, so he's asked the select board to please vote to reconfirm the May 24th, 2021 vote to proceed, and also to authorize me to sign any documentation required. I believe you have the specific language there.
Right. So, I move that we vote to confirm the earlier May 24th, 2021 vote we made to proceed with the acquisition of the Harris Center's Elm Street parcels U023-024-100 and U023-024-000 for the purposes of constructing the new fire station and any other further governmental uses that would be appropriate on this land, as acquiring this land for this use is a very important and very necessary public purpose, and further, to authorize the town administrator, Nicole McStay, to sign the declaration of taking.
Second.
Any objection or further discussion?
There was some hesitancy at one point about this whole process, if I recall. Wasn't there some kind of land swap deal and so on and so forth?
Yeah, we needed to, and the Harris Center asked us to keep these 2 things as 2 separate processes, so that's what we're doing. So we're moving forward with one process, and then we'll address the other process, which we have already started to do along the way.
And everything is copacetic with them?
Everything's fine, yeah. We got the, as you're speaking of the Sawmill property, we did get the environmental report back on it, didn't show any surprises, so there's really nothing to hold that up.
Perfect.
So this isn't big government taking land from a conservation.
I believe that they'll find any land besides that more valuable than that particular one.
All right. All
Ready
those
for
in favor?
vote?
Yep.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And now back to the other.
Consideration of the adoption of the Juneteenth holiday. So as you know, the federal government adopted Juneteenth as a federal holiday. It has not yet been recognized by the state of New Hampshire, but is being adopted in some towns. The question actually came up as a result of a very procedural matter. We have a list that we share with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department of our on-call personnel. And the question came up during that, okay, first, is the town considering Juneteenth a holiday, therefore we need to have them on that we need to have an on-call list for that day, and then if so, who's going to be on that list for that day? So then the question got pitched to the select board, would you like to recognize Juneteenth as a holiday for the employees of the town of Peterborough?
All right. I would be on board with recognizing that day.
I think, well, it's a very important date, of course, and most people didn't even realize that it existed until...
Most white people, if you want to be specific, right? Is that what you want to say?
Probably.
Sorry.
So I'm on board with it as well.
I move that we accept Juneteenth as a town holiday.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll make that notification, put that out to all the employees, so they're aware of that as being a holiday. Of course, Jen will work that into payroll, and we'll have it as essentially an addendum to the employee handbook until the next adopted version.
It's a federal holiday, right?
It is a federal holiday, but it's not a state of New Hampshire holiday,
Well,
which is why we're kind of in this weird...
Sorry, we don't have a sales tax either.
All right, great.
So-
Well, look how...
Yes.
So what does that mean? The town endorses that, does that mean
Town offices will be closed that day.
closed?
Yeah.
And so it is a federal holiday, I'm not sure I even knew that, so the
Yeah.
post office is closed.
Yeah. Schools may be open because it's not adopted by the state yet, so it's up to the school board as to whether or not they choose to adopt it.
But isn't that generally during school vacation anyway?
Typically, the school year's done or just about done by then anyways.
Good point.
Good question, Ed. All right. Any further business?
Not unless you have something you'd like to discuss.
Nothing. Thanks, board.
When did we have plans to discuss the exemptions?
So we don't have a plan to discuss it. Marybeth got very bogged down in responses to residents, and so she used pretty much all of her hours and then some in the last few weeks making those responses. So we haven't had time to really get into the limits for exemptions and whatnot, particularly the elbow nose. That's what you're most interested in. So we'll start working on that next.
Yeah, I've been doing a little bit of statistical work with the charts that you gave me, just taking a look at the various towns around us and then also across the state is roughly the same size and so forth. The numbers are all over.
They are all over the place. So
you can't make sense of them.
It's really a lot easier just to say, okay, well, what do we need for our community and start from there.
Right. All right, motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? You are?
I'm Julia Siniford. I'm with the Ledger.
With the Ledger, right. I saw your boss in the seating here.
Right next to me, yeah.
She's a neighbor of mine, so I'm very familiar with
Yeah,